Now on BBC One Scotland, with some scenes you may find upsetting from the start, the BBC News with Clive, Myrie, and Reporting Scotland with Sally Magnuson. It's 6 o'clock.
Today at 6, 2 explosions kill several people among the thousands gathered at Kabul airport trying to flee Afghanistan. One of the blasts is thought to be the result of a suicide bombing. The casualties include children and US troops.
The explosion was really powerful. Half were hurled into the water, others on the ground outside. We carried the wounded here on stretchers, and here, my clothes are completely bloodied.
There had been warnings that an offshoot of the Islamic State group was planning an attack as people tried to leave the country.
This threat of a terrorist attack is one of the constraints that we've been operating under in Operation Pitting, in the big extraction that's been going on.
Here, the Prime Minister has just chaired a meeting of the Cobra Emergency Committee, also on the programme. Northern Ireland's Health Minister apologises for the worst NHS waiting lists anywhere in the UK. And Sir Lee Pearson wins his 12th Paralympic title, one of 5 more golds for Great Britain in Tokyo.
And on Reporting Scotland at 6:30, the Scottish Green Party confirms its co-leaders will become ministers if their deal with the Scottish Government is approved. And Rangers are through to the group stage of the Europa League after a goalless draw in Armenia.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. It's believed a suicide bomber has detonated explosives among thousands of people waiting outside Kabul airport trying to flee the country. There's also been another explosion at a nearby hotel. Several people have been killed, and the injured include children, while in America the Pentagon says some US troops were wounded. Boris Johnson has chaired a meeting of the Cobra Emergency Committee, but there aren't thought to be any British casualties. The first explosion took place just before dusk outside the Abbey Gate at Kabul airport, where crowds of people had been gathered since the Taliban takeover of the capital just over a week ago. The second explosion was at the Baron Hotel further along the airport perimeter. There had been warnings in recent days that an offshoot of the Islamic State group in the region was planning an attack. With the very latest from Kabul, here's our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. A warning, her report contains distressing images.
The feared attack, a bombing forewarned. Casualties rushed yet again into Kabul's emergency hospital. And they wait for more injured to arrive. The victims of a double suicide bombing close to Kabul airport. This man was there.
I saw at least 400 or 500 people there. The explosion was really powerful. Half were hurled into the water, others on the ground outside. We carried the wounded here on stretchers, and here, my clothes are completely bloodied.
The wounded shoved into wheelbarrows, the Afghans who were hoping to be on an airplane today, flying out to a safer place. This country's endless war shattered that dream. The Islamic State group is believed to have done it. Earlier today, in this gathering storm, an ever-growing clamour to board a flight. This is the centre of Kabul, the people desperate to find ways to get to that airport.
I was security guard with the British people, yes.
How many years?
Maybe 1 year I was, 12 years ago.
Akram doesn't have a visa or a passport, so he created his own documents. So what is this?
Yes.
We worked for years, we are in danger now.
Yes.
What will be our future? But now the British are saying it's too dangerous to go to the airport.
Dangerous, yes. I cannot go in airport. I cannot go.
Even 3-year-old Salim is worried, just listening to his mother. Asma tells us they got to the airport and were sent from gate to gate. She says the Taliban asked, "Why do you want to leave?" and threatened to shoot her. Now it's been 2 days on this street for her exhausted children. The Taliban are now stopping Afghans from even traveling to the airport, but still they try. They're bringing certificates They're bringing flight details. They're bringing whatever letter they've ever had from any government anywhere in the world. Whatever the risks there are in going to the airport, whatever the risks there are at the airport today, for all of them, just look at this. For them, the greatest danger is staying here in Afghanistan. And tonight, that danger all too clear. There had been warnings for a week of an attack like this. A last strike against Western troops set to leave within days. Another blow to many Afghans' last hope of leaving this chaos behind. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Kabul.
Well, our correspondent Secunda Kamani is live in Kabul for us now. Secunda, what's the latest on casualties?
Well, casualty figures still coming in. Final death toll not yet known, but it looks like it's going to be significant. We're talking about dozens of people who were killed and injured. One video that I was seeing shared online showing piles and piles of dead bodies in the middle of a sewage canal. As Lise Doucette, my colleague, was saying in that report just earlier, we had warnings throughout the day from Western intelligence agencies about an attack at the airport by the Islamic State group. That intelligence, it seems, tragically proving remarkably accurate. Now, IS are much less powerful than the Taliban. They do, however, have a history of carrying out brutal and devastating attacks, particularly here in Kabul. The Taliban have fought fiercely against them in the past, seeing them as rivals, in fact, pushing them out of strongholds they had established a few years back in the east of the country. But this attack clearly showing that even though the Taliban's war against the Afghan government is over, bloodshed in Afghanistan, unfortunately, could well continue. As for the evacuation efforts, well, we're hearing that flights are still continuing, but those evacuation efforts are very much in their final stages, with a number of European countries having already finished. We understand the US will soon pivot to evacuating thousands of its soldiers rather than civilians and those Afghans it's relocating.
Okay, Secunda, thank you for that. Secunda Kamani in Kabul. Well, let's get the latest from Washington. Our North America correspondent, Aleem Maqbool, joins us. Aleem, news from the Pentagon today that US troops have been injured in those blasts.
Yes, in fact, we're hearing unconfirmed reports that some of the dead are, in fact, US troops. As I say, that is as yet unconfirmed. But we heard just 10 days ago from Joe Biden that there would be a swift and devastating response if US troops were attacked in Kabul. Well, he hasn't talked about that today, but we have heard that the president has been in the Situation Room monitoring events, and certainly he's been adamant over the last week or so that the US and coalition partners must stick to that self-imposed deadline of the 31st of August to get people out. And he said primarily that was because of security concerns. So on one hand, he may feel to some extent vindicated now that there have been these attacks. On the other hand, of course, these attacks draw yet more attention to the chaotic nature of the US withdrawal of Afghanistan, with critics here saying, well, why on earth did the US vacate their secure military base, Bagram, before this mission was accomplished? And for those who are worried about the humanitarian aspect of things in Afghanistan, well, if there was a risk that some of those who needed to get out will be left behind before this attack, that risk may well have elevated since those attacks.
Okay, Aleem, thank you. Aleem Maqbool there, live in Washington. Well, as Afghan refugees continue to arrive in the UK, one interpreter who worked with British forces has been speaking to our special correspondent Lucy Manning. He's currently in quarantine with his family.
A new life inside UK.
This is what freedom looks like. When you leave your homeland and have to build a home again. This is refuge.
How are you and all the family doing?
Everyone is okay, and now we are in safety, and we are very thankful.
We spoke to Burhan, a former interpreter, and his family last week, hiding in Kabul. UK, please do not leave us, they pleaded. This country didn't leave them. Today, they're in quarantine in a hotel in England.
How is your son coping with all the big changes?
He just watching the window and telling me, when quarantine finished, I will walk this street, I will walk to see that car. Happiness is in his face.
It was a hellish journey. Burhan filmed part of it. The crush outside the airport, close to today's explosion.
It was dangerous for me, and everyone was worried about this situation.
Finally, their last steps on Afghan soil, their first towards a new future.
So how was the feeling when you made it onto that RAF plane?
It was the happiest moment of my life I've ever faced.
They've left the Taliban behind, but also family and friends and other interpreters who almost certainly now can't escape.
What's your message to this government about your colleagues who still can't get out?
I demand from them, kindly demand from them to do their best to evacuate those who are left behind in Kabul up to 31st August. Actually, they have to do because they serve British Army and they are in danger.
At Heathrow today, hundreds more of the fortunate, girls who would have had a little future under the Taliban, who can say what the children will make of this time.
We're happy to hear because they help us, our people in Afghanistan come here, and now we and my family safe here. Thank you a lot in UK.
Burhan's son, Sef Beher, has his pencils and cars. His wife, Narcis, is a doctor. Burhan has this promise.
I will serve this country.
You will serve this country?
Yeah, because they host me. And I'm very thankful from everyone, the kind people here.
This country has opened its doors, but the time it took means others who served Britain won't be helped. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Northern Ireland's Health Minister has apologised for the current state of NHS services. Just under a quarter of the population is on a waiting list, compared to just shy of 1/5 in Wales, nearly 10% in England and 8.2% in Scotland. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports now from Belfast, where more than half of patients needing a first appointment with a consultant have been waiting for more than a year.
Eileen has been waiting more than 4 years to see a consultant. Her GP referred her because her symptoms, including fatigue and problems with balance, could suggest multiple sclerosis. She says it's a struggle now to go to watch her sons playing rugby and football.
I just sometimes feel I'm a number and not a person, and it's just horrible. Even earlier on, I bent down to lift up my wee granddaughter, and I could just feel, I felt that everything drained. I felt my mobility going. I don't know what to do anymore.
Eileen has now launched legal action against the health authorities in Northern Ireland. The Department of Health says it can't comment on court proceedings. Una, who has rheumatoid arthritis, hasn't waited quite as long, but it's still been 18 months, with an operation on her wrist postponed. Now she fears there could be serious long-term consequences.
I am very conscious of the damage that has been done to my wrist already, and the longer I wait, the more damage that's been done, and I'm too young to lose the power of my wrist.
Nearly 500,000 people in Northern Ireland are now on a waiting list to see a consultant or start hospital treatment. Some who can afford it are turning to the private sector, and there's fierce debate over the state of the NHS.
What we have now is a two-tier system. Those who can pay will pay, and those who cannot afford to pay will languish in pain on waiting lists, largely abandoned by the system.
Northern Ireland's waiting list problems go back well before COVID. Over a decade or so, reform plans were drawn up, but then not activated. And there was a sense that political leadership was lacking, with the suspension at one stage of the Northern Ireland Assembly. There are moves to get more patients through diagnostic centres and day surgery units. Ministers have drawn up a 5-year funding plan, but they're not denying there's a steep hill to climb.
I believe in the National Health Service, free at point of use, free at point of delivery. That's what I think we should get back to, and I think that's what we can get back to here.
What do you say to some patients who've been waiting years for treatment? What reassurance can you give them?
Well, look, first of all, I apologise to them. I apologise to them on behalf of our health service, because it's not where we want them to be.
Rising waiting lists have created a difficult challenge for all the UK's administrations, but it's a daunting one here, with the public craving a solution. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Belfast.
The government's latest coronavirus figures show there were 38,281 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 34,072 new cases per day in the last week. The most recent figures show there were 6,906 people in hospital with the virus as of yesterday. 140 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours, with an average of 110 a day in the past week. On vaccinations, more than 88% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and more than 77% have had 2 jabs. The government has announced changes to the COVID travel restrictions for a number of countries. From Monday, Canada, Denmark and Finland are among those moving to the green list, but Thailand and Montenegro move to the red list. Travel bosses say continuing uncertainty over the rules is causing difficulties for the industry. Here's our transport correspondent, Caroline Davis.
The small routines of going on holiday. The number of people travelling abroad has picked up this month, but it's still far behind pre-pandemic levels. And the industry says only a change of the way travel works will make a difference.
What I'd love to see is the requirement for tests on vaccinated passengers, see that lifted. That would stimulate a huge amount of recovery, which would be good for people. They'd have more opportunities to travel, it would be more affordable, and it would support employment across the industry.
The changes will come in across the UK from 4 a.m. on Monday. There are 7 new additions to the green list, including the Azores and Canada. Montenegro and Thailand will go red. Nothing has moved to amber. There will be relief that many major holiday destinations are still amber, but there are concerns that the summer has already set the industry off on a difficult track. The travel industry relies on the money made in busy summers to keep it going throughout the rest of the year. The fact that this summer has so far not lived up to expectations means that there are questions about what happens next. The industry still has thousands of staff on furlough, which stops at the end of September. There are fears jobs could be lost.
You'll see a loss of skills from the industry, so when the industry does want to recover and take off, it won't be able to do it in the same way. A number of the jobs that they will be leaving won't be as well paid as the ones that they move into. So if Britain really does want to be a global economy, we've got to try and protect the infrastructure of that global economy.
This was Ruth's first uniform when she became cabin crew in 1999. Today, she walks a different aisle. She chose to leave the industry this year.
It was very difficult, a real difficult decision. I mean, flying is in my blood and it always will be in my blood. But I've made that decision now to change career, to go on another career path. And so far, so good.
The government are due to look again at the way that international travel works before the 1st of October. It says it's worked hard to open international travel as quickly and safely as possible, and the sector will have benefited from around £7 billion of government support since the start of the pandemic. The summer season is nearly over, but there is still some heat between the travel industry and government. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
It's 18 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. And a suicide bomber has detonated explosives among the thousands of people at Kabul airport trying to flee Afghanistan. The Prime Minister says the UK evacuations will continue. And coming up, Joe Root scores a century for England in the 3rd test against India.
And on Reporting Scotland at 6:30, COVID cases have soared over the last week. How do people feel about these record numbers? And a charity says more than a third of families with children will lose around £1,000 a year when benefits are cut next month.
Great Britain has taken 5 golds across 4 sports on day 2 of the Tokyo Paralympics. Sir Lee Pearson took home his 12th Paralympic title in the Grade 2 individual equestrian test, while there was also success in the velodrome and in the pool. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss reports now from Tokyo.
For Britain's Paralympians, a day of elation and emotion. First for Jacco van Gas. The cyclist was once a soldier, but in Afghanistan in 2009, he suffered life-changing injuries. Now here he was on one of sport's biggest stages, chasing his teammate Finn Graham in the pursuit final. It proved some tussle, but Van Gas edged ahead and held his nerve.
Jacco van Gas takes it.
Triumph for the 35-year-old and another addition to his extraordinary CV. He's previously trekked to the North Pole with Prince Harry. Now, alongside his teammate, he could celebrate another famous feat. And so for the second day running, the velodrome has delivered British delight. And as the sun set here in Tokyo, others were adding to that golden tally. In the para-dressage, a Paralympic legend, Celie Pearson winning the 12th gold of his career on Breezer, a horse he bred at his home in Staffordshire. Something he told me which made it all the sweeter.
It makes it unbelievably extra special. I literally saw him the day that he was born. He stayed really brave, and I still think there's a little bit more in the tank, but he did the perfect test today that he could do.
And the gold rush continued. Wheelchair fencer Piers Gilliver winning his first Paralympic title, while over at the pool there was even more to celebrate. Maisie Summers-Newton was inspired to swim by watching Ellie Simmonds at London 2012. Today, in the individual medley, she beat her hero. Simmonds 5th, Summers-Newton a glorious 1st. But if you thought she was happy, well, back home in Northampton, just look what it meant.
I know it's been Maisie's dream to go to the Paralympics and compete and represent her country, and then to get a gold is just like unbelievable.
And there was also gold for Tully Kearney in the 100 metres freestyle on a day when British smiles were in plentiful supply. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Tokyo.
Campaigners say people with autism are not being well served by the social care system. Research by the charity The Health Foundation shows only around 10% of social care staff have had any training in how to support people with autism. And the National Autistic Society says more than 300,000 people are being let down by their local social services, despite £5.6 billion, that's 40% of local authority spending on social care, going to people with learning disabilities and autism. Our correspondent Jeremy Cook has been to meet one family who feel let down by the social care system.
Hi, my name's Will. I'm 18 and I have severe mental health problems.
He was passionate about so many things. He was intelligent. He was so loving, but he had been troubled his whole life.
I think it's important to share my experience so other people can get the treatment that they need.
Will Melbourne died when he was 19. He'd been reaching out, trying to save others, but felt abandoned by the services that were supposed to save him.
It's such a failure of the system that a boy of that, incredible mind and talent could go through so much pain in his life.
Will was autistic and lived with the torment of chronic anxiety and depression. He loved music, and he and his mum wrote this piece together. It is the sound of love and pain and loss.
I remember I started just crying in class. I'd just stare at the wall and start crying for absolutely no reason. Then I started getting quite suicidal.
A crisis point. Will's family says it came after a lifetime of letdowns, of waiting 6 years for an autism diagnosis, struggling to get help with mental illness and drug use, and fragmented, inconsistent support from social services.
Imagine if you're suffering, and you might even die due to suicide, and yet you're not being given therapy because you have to wait a year and 2 months to get it. It's utterly disgraceful.
He would overdose, he would self-harm, he would cut his wrists, he was attacking us. It was literally untenable.
I was saw by a psychiatric nurse, and do you want to know what they told me? Told me to download a mindfulness app after I just tried to kill myself. An app.
Will was buying drugs on the dark web, self-medication. His life was spiralling down.
He thought of himself as a monster, and he wanted to cure himself, and he wanted to fit into society.
Eventually, the local authority found Will a place to live. He was moved to what's called supported accommodation.
You trust that he is safe with that body, whoever's looking after him. And it was clear that he wasn't safe at all. Yeah.
drinking.
Will died alone in squalor, in the assisted living flat where he was supposed to be safe.
As the need got stronger, the help seemed to fall away even more. It was just, it's incredible.
Was Will savable?
Oh God, yeah. I'm really angry, and I'm really angry at the system. I'm really angry for all the people that are going through this now, and there must be thousands.
This whole system is based on the idea that you have to be in crisis to get help. The crisis service is just not fit for purpose.
Will's family hope an inquest will help answer how and why their son died.
I hope my experience helps someone. Thanks for watching.
The voice of Will Melbourne there in that report from Jeremy Cook. Well, our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt is here. The sad truth is, Alison, Will's case, he's not alone, is he?
Yeah, exactly right, Clive. I mean, Will and his family speak so powerfully about their long, grinding struggle to try and get services, and ultimately the failure of the system to help when it was needed. But part of the tragedy is that there are so many other families who are in that situation. Certainly I've spoken to family after family who, when they have asked for help, they have had difficulties getting that help, particularly when they can see a crisis approaching. The sort of services that might head off that crisis haven't been there, or services have arrived at the point of crisis, and at that point the only option is perhaps a secure hospital, which brings with it all its own problems. The government says it has put £75 million into a new autism strategy in the first year alone, and it describes this as trying to make society a better place for people with autism is a priority for them, they say, and their plans include speeding up diagnosis, mandatory training in autism for health and care staff, and improved crisis intervention services. But when the health service is already under huge pressure with the pandemic, the social care system's crumbling, councils are facing financial difficulties and real difficulties trying to provide services when they're needed in the community. Under those circumstances, you can understand why families would be sceptical until they see those services a reality when they need them.
Sure. Okay. Alison, thank you. Alison Holt. And if you've been affected by any of the issues mentioned in that report, you can find help and advice online at bbc.co.uk/actionline. The Manchester City footballer Benjamin Mendy has been charged with 4 counts of rape and 1 of sexual assault. Police say the allegations relate to 3 complainants aged over 16. The 27-year-old has been suspended by his club and will appear before magistrates in Chester tomorrow. In cricket, England have continued their fine start on the second day of the third test with India at Headingley. A short while ago, they were 418 for 8 in their first innings, a lead of 340. And the captain, Joe Root, continued his sparkling form with the bat, as our sports correspondent, Joe Wilson, explains.
England's players at Headingley wore black armbands in tribute to one of cricket's most stylish batsmen. Look back about 60 years. They say no one hit the ball harder than Ted Dexter.
Oh, magnificent.
He's died aged 86 after a life as full as any and an influence still felt.
Ted, obviously a brilliant servant to the English game, 30 test matches as captain, former chief of selectors as well. He was kind enough to email me on a few occasions when I wasn't playing so well, trying to get me back into form, and was very helpful in that regard. So he'll be sorely missed, and hopefully we can put on a performance in his memory.
Well, England's captain was as good as his word. A Yorkshireman's runs in Yorkshire, nothing better. And exactly how many O's are there in route? Well, at least 50. But he wasn't alone. David Malan, also a Yorkshire player these days, was making his comeback to Test cricket. The eyes of a man who at 33 saw his chance. He made 70. Batting, which had seemed impossible for India, now appeared effortless for England. Root pictured where he wanted to hit the ball and then hit it. In his wild imagination, an England captain might hope to be 220 runs ahead at tea on the second day of a Test match. Well, for Joe Root's England, it was right here and real. What Joe Root wanted from England was ruthlessness. Don't stop when you're ahead, accelerate. The captain leads by example. And of those 3 zeros in Root, he made it to 100. Another one, his 6th this year. And if we're reflecting on the very best English batsmen in history, make no mistake, this man is one of them.
Well, I can report that Joe Root is human. He was dismissed for 121, but England have this lead, Clive, already of 340 runs and 3 days left to surely win this Test match.
OK, Joe, thanks. Joe Wilson there, Headingley. Time now for a look at the weather. Staff has the details.
We'll be broadcasting from our new studio with new ways of bringing...
Well, we clearly have a problem with Stav Deneas there. Maybe he had bad news for us and we didn't get it, so maybe that's OK. Anyway, that's it. So goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good evening.